Let's talk real for a moment because everybody wants peace, but not everybody is willing to do what it takes to get it. See, you can't keep giving your mind permission to run wild over somebody who is not even participating in your life anymore, and then wonder why you feel stuck, tired, and emotionally drained. That's not confusion. That's a pattern you're feeding. Now, I know how it feels. When somebody is not talking to you, not explaining themselves, not giving you closure, your mind starts working overtime. You replay everything. You analyze every detail. You start building entire conversations in your head just to feel some kind of relief. But listen to me carefully. Just because your mind is busy does not mean your life is moving forward. And here's the hard truth most people don't want to face. Peace doesn't come from understanding everything about them. Peace comes from understanding what you are doing to yourself while you're trying to figure them out. Because the more you chase answers that are not coming, the more you abandon your own present life. And before you know it, you're emotionally tied to someone who is not even emotionally present with you. So today, we're going to break something down that most people get completely wrong, why peace has nothing to do with them and everything to do with what you choose to do with your thoughts when they show up. Just because someone stays on your mind constantly does not mean there is a real active or mutual emotional connection still happening between you and them. That is one of the most common emotional misunderstandings people fall into, especially when feelings were once strong or the connection ended without clarity. The mind has a powerful way of convincing you that frequency of thought equals importance or destiny. But in reality, what you are experiencing is often much more internal than relational. When someone keeps appearing in your thoughts again and again, it is usually not a sign that they are thinking about you or that something invisible is still binding the two of you together. More often, it is a sign that your mind has not processed the emotional experience fully. The brain is designed to seek resolution. When something ends clearly, it adjusts and moves forward. But when something ends with confusion, silence, mixed signals, or emotional inconsistency, the mind does not close the file. It keeps it open, revisiting it in an attempt to find meaning, logic, or emotional satisfaction. This is why you can move through your day, stay busy, focus on responsibilities, and still find that person showing up in your thoughts without warning. It is not because they are actively present in your life. It is because your emotional system has not found closure. The mind will replay conversations, analyze small details, and reconstruct moments, trying to figure out what went wrong or what could have been done differently. This process is not love in action. It is the brain trying to complete unfinished emotional business. One of the strongest forces behind this mental attachment is emotional intensity. When someone makes you feel deeply, whether through affection, attention, excitement, or even emotional inconsistency, the brain records that experience with higher importance. Emotional highs and lows create stronger memory imprints than calm, stable interactions. So even if the connection was short-lived or unstable, the emotional charge attached to it can make it feel larger in your memory than it actually was in reality. But memory is not truth. It is reconstruction. And the mind often reconstructs based on feeling, not facts. That is why people can start idealizing someone they are no longer in contact with. The absence of new information allows the brain to fill in the gaps with emotional assumptions, selective memories, and imagined possibilities. Over time, the person becomes less of a real individual and more of a mental symbol representing what was felt during that period. Another key reason someone stays in your mind is because of ambiguity. The human brain struggles deeply with unclear endings. If something ends without explanation, without emotional closure, or without a clear, this is over, the mind refuses to fully accept it. Instead, it keeps looping the situation, searching for answers that were never given. This is where overthinking is born. You begin replaying scenarios, questioning words that were said, analyzing tone, timing, distance, and behavior, trying to extract meaning from something that may never have been clearly defined in the first place. And here's the part that is often hardest to accept. Your thoughts are not always reflections of reality. They are reflections of emotional processing. Just because someone is in your mind does not mean they belong in your life. And it does not mean there is a hidden connection still waiting to be fulfilled. It often means your emotional system is still organizing the experience, trying to make peace with what did not resolve properly. There is also something deeper happening underneath all of this. Attachment. Human beings naturally attach to emotional experiences that create impact, even if those experiences were not healthy, consistent, or mutual. Attachment does not require permanence. It only requires emotional activation. So a person can remain in your thoughts simply because they triggered a strong emotional response in you, not because they are meant to stay connected to your life path. This is where clarity becomes powerful. When you begin to understand that repeated thoughts are not signals of destiny, but signals of unresolved emotion, your entire perspective shifts. You stop chasing meaning in silence. You stop assuming that mental presence equals emotional relevance. And you start recognizing that your mind is not trying to guide you back to someone. It is trying to guide you back to emotional balance. Because ultimately, the presence of someone in your thoughts is not proof of connection. It is proof that something within you is still processing, still learning, still trying to let go. And once you understand that, you stop searching for answers in them and start finding resolution within yourself. When someone is constantly living in your thoughts without any real communication happening between you and them, it is very easy to assume that it must mean something about them. You start believing they must be important in your life in a deeper, almost destined way. But in reality, what is happening inside you is often a reflection of your own emotional state, not their intentions, not their thoughts, and not their awareness of you. Your mind is not a neutral recorder of reality. It is an emotional processor. It takes experiences, especially emotionally charged ones, and stores them in a way that can influence how you feel later. So when someone triggers strong emotions in you, whether it is love, excitement, confusion, disappointment, or even inconsistency, your mind does not just store the person, it stores the feeling attached to them. And later, when something similar is triggered inside you, your brain can bring that person back into your thoughts, even if they are not actively involved in your life anymore. This is where many people misunderstand their own emotions. They think, if I keep thinking about them, it must mean they are thinking about me too, or it must mean there is still something unfinished between us that they also feel. But thoughts are not shared signals. Your inner world is not automatically connected to theirs. What you are experiencing mentally is not a two-way conversation. It is a one-sided emotional replay happening inside your own mind. In most cases, when someone occupies your thoughts constantly, it is revealing more about your emotional sensitivity, attachment style, and unresolved feelings than it is about their current emotional state. Your thoughts are essentially mirrors of what is active inside you. If there is longing, the mind creates images of the person associated with that longing. If there is confusion, the mind replays situations involving them trying to find clarity. If there is emotional attachment, the mind naturally returns to the source of that attachment. This is why two people can go through the exact same situation, and one person moves on quickly while the other person keeps thinking about it for months. The difference is not the intensity of the connection itself. It is how the brain of each individual processes emotional experiences. Some people naturally resolve emotions faster because they accept closure more easily. Others continue mentally looping because their brain is still searching for answers or emotional satisfaction that was never fully received. Another important factor is emotional projection. When someone is no longer present in your life, but still present in your thoughts, your mind often fills the silence with assumptions. You start imagining what they might be doing, how they might be feeling, or whether they are also thinking about you. These thoughts feel real, but they are actually projections created by your emotional mind to fill in the absence of information. The less you know about someone's current reality, the more your mind creates its own version of it. And here is the critical truth. Your mind is always trying to protect you from emotional discomfort. Uncertainty creates discomfort. So when there is no closure, no explanation, and no clear ending, your brain tries to reduce that discomfort by generating thoughts, scenarios, and possibilities. In a strange way, overthinking becomes a coping mechanism. It feels like you are trying to understand the situation, but underneath it, your brain is trying to stabilize emotional uncertainty. This is also why thoughts about someone can feel so persistent. It is not necessarily desire. It is unresolved emotional tension. The mind does not like loose ends. It prefers completion. So it keeps bringing the same person, the same memories, and the same questions back into your awareness because it is trying to reach a sense of emotional resolution that never came from the outside. But none of this automatically means that the other person shares the same mental or emotional experience. They may have moved on, changed focus, or simply stopped thinking about the situation altogether. The mind does not operate like a shared network where thoughts are synchronized. Each person is living in their own internal reality, processing their own emotions completely independent of yours. What you feel is real to you, but it is not evidence of what is happening on their side. That distinction is very important because when you confuse internal emotion with external reality, you give too much meaning to thoughts that are actually just mental echoes of unresolved feelings. The more you begin to understand this, the more you realize that your thoughts are not instructions. They are indicators. They are showing you where your emotional energy is still stuck, where your mind is still seeking clarity, and where you still have inner work to do. Instead of interpreting these thoughts as signs about the other person, you start seeing them as signs about your own emotional processing. And that shift changes everything. Because once you stop believing that your thoughts are proof of a shared connection, you stop giving power to mental repetition. You start seeing it as a personal emotional pattern that can be understood, managed, and eventually released. In the end, your thoughts are not telling you what someone else feels about you. They are telling you what your own mind is still learning to let go of. Uncertainty is one of the most powerful emotional triggers in human psychology, and it is often misunderstood. When something is clear, when you know where you stand, when you understand what happened, when there is a defined ending, the mind has a natural ability to settle. It may still feel pain, but it adjusts because it has information. However, when something is unclear, inconsistent, or left without closure, the mind does something very different. It does not relax. It searches. And in that search, emotional attachment can quietly turn into obsession. This is why uncertainty creates such a strong mental grip. It doesn't matter how long or short the connection was. What matters is whether your mind received enough clarity to close the emotional loop. When it didn't, the brain keeps returning to the situation, trying to solve it like an unfinished equation. You replay conversations, you analyze tone, you question timing, you try to interpret silence as if it contains hidden meaning. But the truth is, your mind is not seeking love in those moments. It is seeking resolution. When there is no clear ending, the brain treats the experience as incomplete. And incomplete experiences do not get stored as past. They stay active in the present. That is why you can be months removed from a situation and still feel mentally connected to it. It is not because the connection is still alive externally. It is because internally, your mind never received a final emotional stop signal. This is where many people confuse obsession with love. Love, in its healthiest form, is grounded in clarity, mutual presence, and emotional reciprocity. It feels steady even when it is intense. But uncertainty creates something very different. It creates emotional instability inside you. One moment you feel connected through memory. The next moment you feel confused by absence. That emotional fluctuation keeps your mind engaged far longer than the actual situation deserves. The brain is naturally drawn to patterns and meaning. So when someone's behavior is inconsistent, warm at one moment, distant at another, it creates a psychological loop. You begin trying to decode the pattern. What did that mean? Why did they act like that? Was it genuine or not? Each question feels like it deserves an answer, and your mind keeps searching for one. But in many cases, there is no deeper hidden code to solve. There is only inconsistency, and inconsistency fuels mental repetition. This is also why silence can feel louder than words. When communication stops, your mind does not interpret it as nothing is happening. Instead, it interprets it as something is unresolved. And because there is no external explanation, the internal world becomes active. You start creating explanations yourself. You imagine scenarios where things could still work out. You revisit moments where things felt good. You try to find evidence that the situation still holds meaning. But all of this is your mind attempting to replace missing clarity with constructed meaning. The danger here is not that you are thinking. It is that thinking begins to feel like truth. Repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity starts to feel like reality. The more you think about someone, the more your brain assumes they are significant in your present life, even if they are not actively involved. This is how uncertainty quietly turns into emotional attachment. Not because the connection is strong, but because the mind has been left without closure long enough to keep it alive internally. Another layer to this is emotional dependency on answers. When someone leaves things unclear, your brain becomes conditioned to believe that peace is located in understanding them. You start thinking, if I just figure this out, I will feel better. But in reality, most of the relief does not come from understanding the other person. It comes from accepting that some things were never meant to be fully explained. Until that acceptance happens, the mind stays locked in pursuit mode, always chasing a final piece of information that may never come. And this is where obsession quietly forms. Not because you want the person constantly, but because your mind is trying to complete an emotional story that was left unfinished. It is less about the person and more about the lack of closure they represent. The more unfinished the experience feels, the more space it occupies in your thoughts. What makes this even more powerful is that the brain does not distinguish between productive thinking and repetitive looping. So every time you revisit the situation mentally, it feels like you are getting closer to an answer. But in most cases, you are simply retracing the same emotional path without reaching resolution. It becomes a cycle. Confusion leads to thinking. Thinking leads to temporary relief, and then the confusion returns again. Breaking this cycle does not require more thinking. It requires understanding what is actually happening. The mind is not trying to guide you back to someone. It is trying to guide you toward emotional closure. And closure does not always come from the other person. In many cases, it comes from within you. When you finally accept that clarity may never arrive externally. Once that realization settles in, something important shifts. The urgency to decode, analyze, and replay begins to fade. The situation stops feeling like an unfinished puzzle and starts feeling like a completed experience that simply lacked explanation. And in that shift, the mind finally begins to let go. Not because it received answers, but because it stopped believing that answers were still required for peace. Peace does not come from having every question answered, and it certainly does not come from endlessly analyzing what someone said, did not say, or might have meant. Peace comes from a shift in direction, from looking outward for explanations to looking inward for stability. Most people assume that overthinking will eventually lead them to clarity, but in reality, overthinking usually leads deeper into confusion. The more you try to mentally solve something that is emotionally unresolved, the more energy you give it, and the more it stays alive in your mind. The human mind is designed to analyze, interpret, and search for meaning. That is its natural function. But when it is directed towards situations that no longer have active participation from the other side, it starts operating in a loop. It keeps revisiting the same memories, the same conversations, and the same emotional moments, hoping that repeated analysis will finally produce a different answer. But emotional peace is not discovered through repetition. It is created through acceptance. Acceptance is not about agreeing with what happened or pretending it did not affect you. It is about recognizing that continued mental engagement with something that is no longer active in your life does not bring resolution. It only prolongs emotional exhaustion. When you keep revisiting a situation that has already ended, you are not gaining insight. You are reinforcing attachment to something that no longer exists in the present moment. One of the biggest misunderstandings people have is believing that clarity will eventually arrive if they just think long enough. They assume that if they analyze every detail, they will reach a final conclusion that makes everything make sense. But life does not always offer clean explanations. Some experiences end without closure, without conversation, and without mutual understanding. And in those cases, the mind has to learn a different skill, the ability to release without full understanding. Peace begins when you stop treating unanswered questions as emergencies. Not every silence needs decoding. Not every absence needs interpretation. Not every emotional discomfort is a puzzle that must be solved. Sometimes the discomfort exists simply because the mind is still attached to an outcome that is no longer available. And the more attention you give that attachment, the stronger it becomes. When you are stuck in overthinking, it often feels like you are trying to find peace by figuring things out. But what is actually happening is the opposite. You are using mental effort to avoid emotional acceptance. Acceptance feels uncomfortable at first because it removes the illusion of control. Thinking makes you feel like you are doing something. Acceptance feels like letting go without certainty. But only one of these paths actually leads to peace. True emotional peace starts when you begin to shift your focus from what you cannot control to what you can control. You cannot control someone's feelings, their decisions, their silence, or their absence. But you can control how long you allow their absence to occupy your mental space. You can control whether you continue feeding the thought cycle or gently redirecting your attention back to your own life. And this is where inner strength develops, not in forcing yourself to stop thinking, but in no longer giving importance to thoughts that do not serve your present reality. Thoughts will still come. Memories will still appear. But peace is not the absence of thoughts. It is the ability to not engage with every thought as if it holds power over you. Another important part of peace is understanding emotional energy. Every time you replay a memory or imagine a scenario with someone who is not present, you are giving energy to something that is not reciprocating that energy. It is one-sided investment. And one-sided emotional investment always leads to depletion. You feel tired, mentally occupied, and emotionally stuck, not because something is happening externally, but because internally, your attention is constantly being pulled backward. Peace begins when you start redirecting that energy back into your current life, your goals, your growth, your present relationships, and your personal development. At first, this redirection feels difficult because the mind resists letting go of familiar emotional patterns. But over time, what you consistently focus on becomes stronger in your awareness, and what you stop feeding begins to fade naturally. It is also important to understand that peace is not a destination you reach after fully understanding someone else. It is a state you enter when you stop needing them to be understood in order for you to move forward. That shift is powerful because it removes dependency on external closure. Instead of waiting for an explanation, apology, or return, you create closure internally by deciding that your life does not need unresolved situations to define your emotional state. When that internal decision is made, something subtle but powerful changes. The urgency to think about them decreases. The emotional charge around memories begins to weaken. The mind still remembers, but it no longer attaches meaning to every recollection. And slowly, what once felt like emotional noise begins to quiet down. That quietness is peace, not because everything was resolved externally, but because you stopped requiring external resolution to feel stable inside yourself. So let's bring this all together in a real, honest way. If your mind has been stuck on somebody who is not even in communication with you, you have to understand something powerful today. You are not stuck because of them. You are stuck because of the meaning you keep assigning to the silence. And the moment you stop treating silence like a mystery that needs solving, you start taking your power back. Because at the end of the day, peace is not something you wait for someone else to give you. Peace is something you choose when you decide you are no longer going to let unanswered questions rent space in your mind for free. You don't need more analysis. You don't need more replaying. You don't need to keep going over the same memories, hoping they will somehow turn into a different outcome. What you need is a decision that says, I am done letting confusion control my attention. And I know that sounds simple, but it is powerful when you actually live it. Because the moment you stop feeding what is not feeding you back, your energy starts returning to you. Your focus comes back. Your clarity comes back. And slowly, what once felt heavy in your mind starts losing its grip on your life. Now hear this clearly. Moving on is not about forgetting someone. It is about no longer allowing their absence to interrupt your presence. It is about getting back into your life so deeply that what does not belong there naturally fades into the background. So if you take anything from this, take this truth with you. You don't find peace by solving every emotional mystery. You find peace by refusing to stay trapped inside one. And when you finally make that shift, you will realize something life-changing. Your mind was never meant to live in the past. It was built to create your future.